Stoic as cameras swarm him outside a federal court in Miami. This is 16-year-old Timothy Hudson, accused of killing and sexually assaulting his stepsister aboard a Carnival cruise ship. Heading into today, Timothy Hudson has been free from jail. He's accused of strangling 18-year-old Anna Kepner in their stateroom while they were on a family cruise together last year. The bombshell decision the judge made today inside the courtroom about whether Hudson could go home. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Hey guys, real quick, before we get into this episode of On the Case, I want to tell you about this free app, Upside. It gets you cash back on everyday purchases like gas, groceries, and takeout. Here's what you do. Download Upside for free, claim an offer at one of their 100,000 plus locations, then pay like you normally would with your card. After that, verify the purchase and you get money back. Say I need gas or want to get takeout one night. I search for offers on Upside. Then after I spend, money appears in my app and I just transfer it straight to my bank. Upside's frequent users earn an average of $254 back a year. So to start getting your cash back, click the link in the description or scan the QR code and use promo code OTC to get an extra 25 cents bonus on every gallon on your first tank of gas. A federal judge in Miami just made a major decision today in the case of Anna Kepner. She is the victim in this story, an 18-year-old girl who would be graduating high school right now had she not been allegedly killed by her own stepbrother. That boy who is in court today, he is being tried as an adult. And if found guilty of truly horrific allegations, he could spend decades in prison. And today this story took yet another major twist. So this is video of Timothy Hudson, 16 years old, entering federal court in Miami this morning. And as you can see, he showed little emotion. He kept his eyes forward as cameras surrounded him. His dad was by his side, and he ushered his son through the doors to the courthouse. Now, whether or not they were able to come out of that courthouse together today, we'll talk about that in just a moment. But you have to understand what this 16-year-old is facing. Charges of murder and aggravated sexual abuse for what he allegedly did to his stepsister. These are some sketches we just got in from this detention hearing. That is Timothy in federal court today. This hearing was to decide whether or not he should be held in pretrial detention. Cameras are not allowed in federal court. Now, we do have a reporter who is in the courtroom, Nick Papantonis from WFTV, who's going to join us here in just a moment to break down what happened, what it means for this case going forward. We'll talk to him in a moment. To this point, Timothy Hudson has been out on supervised release. You might remember initially he was charged as a minor in this case because of his age, and he was allowed to live with his uncle as his case worked through the system. But now he is being tried as an adult. Today, prosecutors asked a judge to put Timothy in pretrial detention. And Timothy is now facing a far more serious punishment if he were found guilty on these charges. Now, before we get, again, to what the judge decided, I want to break down what he is accused of and how he got to this point. And we need to start with Anna Kepner, who is Timothy's stepsister, the woman at the center of this case. The two of them were with family on this cruise, and it was supposed to be the start of a new family tradition, celebrating this blended family that had come together. And this cruise was roughly a week long. It left Miami and went to a couple destinations in the Caribbean. Then it was set to return to Miami. Now, this family came together because of Anna's dad and Timothy Hudson's mom. And the family dynamics at play in this story are very important. So you have Chris Kepner, Anna's dad, and he marries a woman named Chantel Hudson, who now goes by Chantel Kepner, and she is the mom to Timothy Hudson. So there's a lot of debate to this point about what Anna's relationship was like with Timothy Hudson before her death. You had Anna's grandparents who told ABC News that they were, quote, two peas in a pod. They said that they had a real brother-sister type connection. But then you have people like Anna's ex-boyfriend who said that was very far from the truth. Here is what he told the Space Coast Rocket media outlet.
It was suspicious because I knew that the brother did it, and I heard his footsteps like running through the house, because he got caught.
So there you have this disturbing anecdote that he alleges about what Hudson was allegedly like around Anna Kepner. And it has been alleged that Timothy and Anna shared a room together aboard this ship. Now, up until April of this year, we didn't have a lot of information officially about where the investigation was at into Anna's death because this case against Hudson was sealed. But we have since learned a lot more information through a custody dispute that has played out in family court where cameras are allowed involving Chantel Kepner, who is Timothy Hudson's mom, and her ex-husband. Now, her ex has accused Chantel in the wake of Anna Kepner's death of having, quote, inappropriate living arrangements on the ship. Chantel Hudson was also accused by her ex of, quote, medication mismanagement related to Timothy. In a custody hearing, Chantel said this, and it's important that you hear this because this could play a role, potentially, in Timothy's defense if this case goes to trial.
As far as Timothy, does he have any diagnoses?
He has ADHD.
And how long has he been diagnosed with ADHD?
About 3 or 4 years.
Those after your separation from Mr. Hudson, correct?
About that timeline, yes.
And does he receive medication for his ADHD?
He does.
And what medication was he on for his ADHD?
Methylphenidate.
Would you pronounce that for me and spell it, Pam, if you know?
Methylphenidate, I don't know the spelling.
Okay,
The name brand's Concerta, if that
okay,
helps.
thank you.
And how often would Timothy take that medication?
Every morning.
And did he take the medication on the cruise with him?
Yes. He also takes a nighttime pill as well.
The same medication?
No, it's clonidine.
What is that for?
Insomnia.
Did you hold on to the medications?
Yes.
Did you make sure he took his medications every day?
He took his morning pill every day, and he missed 2 doses of his clonidine at night.
You held on to the clonidine as well?
Mm-hmm.
That's yes?
Yes, sorry.
And what do you mean he missed the doses? What happened there?
He went to bed before he got it. He was already asleep.
Including that Thursday night?
No, Thursday night he didn't get it. I fell asleep before he did.
So just to make sure I understand, ma'am, while on the cruise, he missed taking that nighttime medication twice. One of the nights was because he fell asleep prior to taking
Yes.
the medication, and the other night was the night before
Correct. I fell asleep before he
you
did.
fell asleep,
Yes,
so
ma'am.
he did not get the medication the night
Yeah, he didn't come and
before
ask
the
for it.
incident.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
And this is what has been alleged to have happened aboard the ship. It was on November 8th that we received word that there was a body being taken off of a Carnival ship that had just returned to port in Miami after a week-long cruise in the Caribbean. This is video per WSVN television. A reporter named Sheldon Fox was right there at the dock and was able to get a video of what is believed to be Kepner's body being taken off of the ship after it returned to port. Her body was then taken to the Miami-Dade County Medical Examiner's office. An autopsy would find that Anna died from what's called mechanical asphyxiation. In more blunt terms, allegedly someone had choked her to death. Now, Anna's dad told the Daily Mail that he saw his daughter's body in the stateroom where she was allegedly found by crew members. She was allegedly strangled to death and then stuffed under a bed, allegedly covered with life jackets. The only other person allegedly in the room with Anna that night was her stepbrother, Timothy Hudson. The Daily Mail also says the night that Anna was killed, her half-brother, who was also staying in the room with her and Hudson, went to sleep not knowing that her body was still in that stateroom. Then the next morning, that half-brother went to the family breakfast with Timothy Hudson as if nothing had allegedly happened. And then when Anna didn't show up for breakfast, the crew started looking for her, and that is when they made that terrible discovery in the stateroom of her body. Now, as far as what Timothy's defense could be, his grandparents told ABC News that Timothy has told them that he just doesn't remember what happened. So we'll see if that is part of the argument that his defense could make if this ends up going to trial. It's important to note that Timothy Hudson has pleaded not guilty to the charges. So today the court was not deciding if he was guilty of these charges of allegedly killing and sexually assaulting his stepsister. Today's hearing was about whether or not Timothy should be able to live outside of a jail cell as this case moves forward ahead of a trial. When Hudson was charged as a juvenile, he was allowed to live with his uncle, according to court records, and he is wearing a GPS monitor. Now that the case is in adult court, prosecutors have asked that Hudson be taken into custody. Prosecutors have filed a motion saying that the rules that allowed Hudson to not be in custody no longer apply, claiming, quote, the defendant is a danger to others and should be held in pretrial detention. They also go on to say, quote, defendant engaged and involved the most serious, egregious, and violative crimes one person can inflict upon another. He committed these crimes against a victim with whom he had no apparent relational strife and whom he was being raised to view as a sibling. Furthermore, he carried out these crimes without any warning. He could commit such atrocious acts, and despite an apparent supportive family environment, finally, the defendant currently lives in a home where minor children reside. Consequently, there is no assurance any court could ever have that any conditions or combination of conditions would be sufficient to prevent the defendant from being a danger to others. Thus, the defendant should be detained. Certainly strong words from prosecutors ahead of this hearing as to why Timothy Hudson should be held in a jail or juvenile facility before a trial. Now, in response, Hudson's defense asked for a hearing to be held in front of the same judge that allowed Hudson to not be in custody when he was facing murder charges in the juvenile system, which is what played out today. And in their motion ahead of today, the defense asks, quote, as the past 2 months have unequivocally demonstrated, there is a combination of conditions that can be placed on Timothy Hudson liberty to ensure that he is not a danger to the community, end quote. The defense also says that Hudson had followed all the rules of his release order that were set roughly 2 months ago. So let's get into what happened today in court. Joining us now, a reporter who was inside the courtroom today in Miami, WFTV's Nick Papantonis. Thanks for taking the time, Nick, to be with us. First off, just break down what we can take away from today and what it means for Timothy Hudson and what happens next.
So right now, what we know is that Timothy Hudson's going to remain out of custody, in the custody essentially of his uncle over in the west coast of Florida. This is a partial victory for him because the judge has not necessarily made a final determination about whether they'll be locked up or not before his trial. The judge has kind of said, I want to review a few of my options here. I don't think he's a flight risk. I don't think there's enough evidence right now to say we need to put him in custody immediately. But it is not necessarily a get out of jail free card, if you want me to use that term. We will be expecting a final determination from him in the future.
And I know that this hearing today was for roughly 2 hours or so. It's federal court, so we don't have cameras inside to see exactly how it played out. Like, what was kind of the summary of the proceedings and how both sides presented their opinions on what should happen?
So the prosecution did most of the talking in this case. The prosecutor was very passionate in saying that she believes he is a danger to the community and that he is a flight risk. It was, excuse me, a serious crime that he's alleged to have committed, murder and sexual assault, both life in prison. She reminded the judge of that over and over again, and also reminded the judge in great detail about Anna's death and some of the details that have not been released publicly before. So she was making that case that he should be not out in public and he should be locked up before this trial, whenever it does happen. The defense spoke significantly less. They did consider the case. They said they consider the case to be circumstantial, full hold. It's something that we see often from defense attorneys, but was a lot more conciliatory towards the judge and towards whatever the judge's decision was going to be. knowing that obviously in a case like this where there's evidence that is starting to come out now that is pretty clear about certain aspects of this, it's going to be an uphill battle for them. And so, but again, they walked away with at least the temporary victory, and the determination that the judge is trying to make is, do they keep Hudson in Miami and near the courthouse, which is what the lawyers prefer, or do they find a place in Hernando County or in the Tampa region, which is closer to where that family is? The judge seems to think that it would be better for him to have more visits from family and the more opportunity for that. You mentioned also what happened, and I referenced this, is that we learned some new details about this case that had not been reported before. We learned the window in which Anna is alleged to have died. Her last message that was sent out from her phone was a Snapchat message, and that was about 8:14 p.m. the night of her death. There was no movement in or out of the cabin captured on a security camera video of the ship between when she last went into her cabin and during that time frame until Timothy Hudson poked his head out of the cabin, looked both ways down the hallway at about 10:13 p.m. and then left the cabin. And that was, he was out. Nobody else was in the cabin until a younger family member came back about an hour later for about 30 seconds to 2 minutes, I think it was that frame. And that younger family member told investigators that he didn't see his sister at the time when he went back in there. He left that younger family member and then returned just after midnight when Timothy was back in the room. Timothy allegedly blocked him from entering the room for a few minutes and then let him in. And that family member again said, "I did not see my sister there." We also learned that the morning after Anna is alleged to have died, Timothy was seen walking the course of the ship from one side to the other, kind of a diagonal fashion. He stopped by a trash can for 22 seconds and then walked back to his cabin. And what prosecutors told the judge is, in that time frame, Anna's phone was pinging the routers off of the ship because she had the internet plan for that ship until he reached the trash can. And when he walked back to his cabin, Anna's phone continued to ping the router that was close to that trash can.
Oh, so that is an interesting development to see them. What was the emotion like in the courtroom, like as these new details were coming to light? I mean, I don't know who else was also in the courtroom in terms of family members. I know we saw, I believe it was Timothy Hudson's dad who was with him going into the courthouse today. Just like, what was the mood as this case, new information being laid out? What was the mood in there as that was kind of, coming to light?
The most emotion actually came from the prosecutor as she was trying to argue her case. The family has heard, it was the dad, you're correct, that was there. I believe the uncle was as well. And but this family has heard these details before. They came out during a hearing when he was still being considered a juvenile back in February. We just got a hold of the transcript from that hearing, and so I was reading through this in the moments before we started talking, and I could see they played out this in more detail than we heard today. So this was not necessarily new, and we didn't see much emotion or reaction from them. We did see Hudson appearing to wipe his eyes a couple of times as the prosecutor was talking about the sexual assault element of the accusations against him. But he was also, just to be fair, he was also blowing his nose throughout, so it was unclear if it was more emotion or if it was something more allergy related, because we do have that going on right now in Florida as well.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question, because each time we've seen Timothy Hudson, and it's really been twice at this point, that the first time he showed up at court in Miami and kind of covered his face as he was walking into the courthouse. And then today where he wasn't really covering his face, but it seems like he's always had this very stoic look on his face, and we haven't seen a lot of emotion from him. What else stood out to you, just kind of being in the same room as him, where, he's someone we've heard so much about since November of last year when this terrible tragedy took place? What has stood out to you about him, just kind of being in the same room as him?
I think one of the interesting things about this case is that, and it was pointed out today, there is no case law for a situation like this. So we're talking about some incredibly serious and frankly rare accusations and charges here, not the charges themselves, but the circumstances. And then we're talking about a 16-year-old. The closest case that any of the attorneys could find was from a few years back involving a death on a cruise ship, and it wasn't a couple of adults in that case. And so what you're looking at as you're hearing the lawyers talk, and then you're looking at Hudson, is you realize that you're talking about a 16-year-old, someone that in most other circumstances would still be considered juvenile, is biologically still a juvenile. And you're talking about the possibility of life in prison. And if he even takes a plea deal, he's facing 30 years. That was part of the prosecutor's argument for why he would be considered a flight risk. And so the gravity of what this young man is facing right now, if he is convicted, and just what he's facing in general, it's not something that most, it's 99% of 16-year-olds would ever look at. And so you have a hard time as someone that covers courts quite often. It's very surreal to be talking about the circumstances of this and then looking at the victim, at the suspects or defendant's age. And that's part. When Hudson himself appears to have been prepared for what was going on. I'm sure that his attorney had warned him, and his attorney actually this morning approached from the opposite direction as him. So managed to convince most cameras he was going to come from one direction, and then he sort of snuck up behind everybody at the last moment. There's no real avoiding that when you're coming out of a courthouse, and they did take their time coming out, but they did emerge pretty quickly and made sure the car was right there and ready for him to get inside without speaking.
The Kepner family is from your coverage area. WFTV, covers Central Florida, does a great job of doing it. And I just think of the family dynamics that have been at play in this story, where it was this blended family that was on this cruise ship, and then you have, the custody case that has played out with Chantel Kepner, and the information that we learned from that. What has it been like for you covering this story and kind of covering the different layers of family that has all been impacted by what happened on this ship?
I can only speak to this to a certain degree. We have another reporter that has dealt more with the family than I have, but it has been unusual in a certain sense that many of the details that we learned early on in this case were coming from that family dynamic. And it's something that we had to be careful about as reporters. Is we have a lot of accusations flying around, a lot of things that have not been confirmed. We don't have any evidence to back them up, but it's coming through this family court docket, which is just unusual in itself. And it's something that we don't often focus on as Florida media outlets. Family court usually doesn't rise to our level. But you can see the turmoil within the family just because of the filings, because there was no real effort to conceal what was going on. This is how we learned that Timothy Hudson was the suspect in this case from the earliest days. So that's been unusual for us.
Was there any sign, and I just know through like previous interviews that on Anna Kepner's side of the family, her dad had said that he wouldn't be at Timothy Hudson's trial, that his wife, Timothy Hudson's biological mom, I believe, right? Like would not be at the trial as well. Like, was there any sign of them or any sign of people perhaps on Anna Kepner's side of the family there today?
I didn't see anybody that stood out as family. I've never met them in person, but they did bring people into the courtroom in a certain order, and when they called for family, there was only one side that entered. So I only saw on Anna's side, it was mostly journalists, court staff, and it looked like a few interns as well. Timothy's side was some journalists, but seemed to be a lot more family there to support him from his biological side.
And now that this decision has been made by the judge, kind of a decision that he will make a decision, what can we expect to happen next in this case?
So what's going to happen is the judge is ordering the marshals right now to look for a facility that would be suitable to hold Hudson in the Tampa area, and specifically Hernando County or something close to that where his family currently resides. They've cleared a facility in Miami-Dade already to house him, and both attorneys had indicated to the judge and said outright that they would prefer him to be in Miami-Dade. But the judge felt like it would be better. Excuse me. The judge felt like it would be better for Hudson to have access to his family. So the marshals will go out whenever they have the ability to see if there's a facility either in Hernando or a surrounding county that meets all the qualifications to help house him, which would include housing him with juveniles that are also facing adult charges that have not yet been convicted. Part of the order will likely is going to be no solitary confinement either, so it has to be something where he can be housed in a group setting. And then if there is a suitable facility that is found somewhere between Hernando, Tampa, the Sarasota area even, or Ocala, which gets towards our area and the Orlando coverage market, then that judge is going to have a decision to make. Is he going to stick by what he said in this hearing and to one side, which was he doesn't appear to be a flight risk, and nothing has happened, so to speak, so far since he's been out for the months that he has been out. But you also are weighing that against the very real reality that there might be, which is he's accused of killing his stepsister, and it happened without warning, as the prosecutor mentioned over and over again today. So the judge is going to have that tough call to make: does he ask him to be detained or order him to be detained or not? The judge did say at one point that if it were somebody that was older, if it was somebody that was 20, 22, 24 years old, that person would be in custody right now. And this difference maker is the age, and specifically the amount of resources that Hudson has available to him. He doesn't have a car. He doesn't have much money. He's 16, right? So he doesn't have the ability to escape like somebody else would.
Yeah, no, and like you were saying earlier, I mean, this is a very unique case for a lot of different reasons. Just a tragic, tragic case that we'll continue to follow. Nick Papantonis, WFTV, thank you for taking the time to be with us on Law and Crime. We appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you so much for your time.
Joining us now to break down this decision is former federal prosecutor and president of West Coast Trial Lawyers, Nima Rahmani. Always great to have you here on Law and Crime. I found it interesting that the judge today said something along the lines of, if Timothy Hudson was 20 years old, he would be detained. But because he's 16, he's able to walk out of the federal courthouse in Miami. He still, to this point, is not being held in pretrial detention. What do you make of that decision?
Chris, thanks for having me as always. And, in our federal criminal justice system, there just aren't a lot of prosecutions of juveniles. It typically happens in state court. Obviously, this is a case where you're talking about a cruise ship murder, so there is federal jurisdiction. But I can tell you personally, for instance, I put more than 1,000 people in federal prison, and I don't recall ever prosecuting a minor. So there are a lot of procedural steps that you have to go through to charge a minor. Obviously, in a murder case, you're absolutely going to do that. But the reason I'm saying this, Chris, is as far as the marshals are concerned in facilities, there's just not a lot of placements for juveniles like there are in state court.
What do you make of how the federal system seems to be treating Timothy Hudson? Because it feels like on one end, like he's 16 years old, so he is, like, biologically, he is a minor. But at the same time, like, he is accused of some horrific, horrific crimes. And I can see why prosecutors say that he could be a danger, because what he's accused of doing, and it seems like they have strong evidence to prove that. We'll see how that plays out. But it seems like there's kind of this balance of, yeah, he's a minor, but at the same time, he's being tried as an adult.
And no question. And you're talking about rape and murder of someone's stepsister, right? It doesn't really get much worse than that. So there's no question. Typically, someone like this would be deemed a danger to the community and they would be detained. No questions asked. It'd be a presumption case. Typically, you would expect the defense to even stipulate to detention because it's such a foregone conclusion. I think had the judge had some more clarity and knew where the placement would be, and if the U.S. Attorney's Office would have come in and said, listen, we've spoken to the marshals, we've spoken to the head of this facility, he will be isolated from the general population. He will not be with male adult inmates or detainees who are pending trial. I think that probably would have done it. I don't think the judge was satisfied. Now, look, the government can always go in and ask for remand and ask for this to be reheard. I think the judge was just uncomfortable because there was no clear placement. Obviously, the defense made some arguments in terms of, look, here's someone who's living with his uncle and who didn't flee before and who's attended all previous court hearings. I don't think that would have carried the day had there been an appropriate placement for him.
Yeah, that was my next question. Like, whose responsibility is it in those situations? Because now they're going to search and try to find a place that, they didn't want to put him in Miami-Dade County lockup where he's charged, but then perhaps find something maybe closer to the Gulf Coast of Florida where he's originally from. Whose responsibility is it to do that work ahead of time, to come in and say, we believe that this is a facility that will take him right now and this is where he could be?
So there's really two parts to a criminal case in terms of responsibility for individuals. At the beginning of the case, before there is a guilty plea or a conviction at jury trial or bench trial, the inmates or detainees, they're in the custody of the U.S. Marshals. Pretrial services is also involved in assessing risk and making recommendations. But those are the two entities that manage individuals. And the reason they're responsible is that they have to make sure they come to and from court. So those are the individuals that handle detention or travel before a guilty plea or conviction. When that plea happens, then it moves to the other individuals, which really is the Bureau of Prisons, the BOP, and U.S. probation. So those are the individuals that get involved. And that's why, even though judges make recommendations, a placement here, the BOP can really ship anyone anywhere in the country based on availability, based on security, space, and that type of thing. So right now, it's really the marshals who need to be providing the information to the U.S. Attorney's Office. This is all under the Department of Justice to make sure that there is an appropriate placement pending trial.
Are you surprised that he was able to walk out just based on what he's accused of and how this is now an adult court? Are you surprised by this decision by the judge?
I was surprised by this decision. I understand the decision and just the uncertainty. I think the defense did a good job here raising that uncertainty. I mean, the judge specifically said if this were an adult, no question, he would be detained. So if you believe that he is being prosecuted as an adult appropriately and that is legally sound, then I believe that he should also be detained pending trial. Detention is not appropriate when someone's at risk of flight or danger. And I can't really speak to the flight risk. I'm not sure that that's there, but there's certainly plenty of evidence that he's a danger to the community. And one of the things the prosecution raised is he's living in a home with two other minors. I mean, that's a potential problem, and he does expose risk to other people who are in that home as well.
Yeah, because that's the part where I think of prosecutors today, and from what we understand from talking to people who are inside the courtroom, there was this, they were just talking about how the prosecutors, like just how much of a danger he is, and they're laying out all these details from the case. And I mean, we've certainly, have gone through before what he's accused of. And I just wonder if you're a prosecutor and I mean, you pound the table that he's this danger to the public, but then the judge says, well, if he was 20, I'm definitely keeping him in. I mean, what more could there have been for prosecutors to try to keep him behind bars pre-trial?
I think what prosecutors should have done, obviously some of this is armchair quarterbacking, Monday morning quarterbacking, whatever you want to call it, right? In retrospect, is to really have that placement buttoned up to be able to present to the court, look, this is where he will be held. He will be safe. He will not be the victim of violence, because obviously we know that that's certainly possible. Had they had that in a way that really set the judge's mind at ease, I don't think we would be having this conversation. I do believe that he would be detained.
And then when it comes to some of the stuff that we've talked a little bit about before in this, and some of the unique natures to this story, and I was talking to a reporter who was in the courtroom today, and he said what was brought up by the judge, I think at one point, was like, there's really not a lot of case law in this. It's a very unique case when you think of a 16-year-old, this cruise ship. I guess the only previous case they were able to bring up was about an adult who had been charged with something along the lines of what Timothy Hudson is now accused of. Like, is there anything in your history you can think of that compares to what we're dealing with? And when you're dealing with a case where maybe there isn't a lot of precedent in the past, like how does that impact how the proceedings play out?
Yeah, the judges typically have a lot of discretion when it comes to bail determinations. It's really an abuse of discretion standard. If you want to take this up on appeal to the 11th Circuit, for instance, oftentimes these decisions are made by magistrate judges. It appears that a district judge made it in this case because it is such a serious issue. But you're right, Chris, there's not a lot of precedent because it's just not that common. Federal murder isn't charged usually. This administration is doing a lot more of it, especially in states where they deem that there's no death penalty or prosecutors are being soft on crime. But typically, murder is handled in state court. Juvenile prosecutions of violent crime, those are handled in state court. So you don't have a lot of these cases because there usually isn't federal jurisdiction, or it's more appropriate in terms of the law enforcement, police officers, sheriffs, detectives who are investigating the case for it to be a state case. Again, what makes this case so unique is where the murder happened, the fact that it happened on a cruise ship. It's really the only reason we're talking about this case being in federal court.
Don't know what Timothy Hudson's defense will be if and when this goes to trial. We do know his grandparents have said, as well as some other family members have said, that he says he just doesn't remember, that he blacked out. And I know I've asked you this question before, but since we're kind of on this topic again, for that to be a defense that would actually have any sort of teeth in defending him, what would you have to prove at that point? I mean, is there anything you can prove with the "I just don't remember" defense? Because I know in the past, typically that's not one that holds up pretty strongly in court.
It's a very difficult defense, Chris. I mean, jurors don't buy it, but this is going to be a difficult case to defend, period, right? I mean, oftentimes what you see in a murder case is, it wasn't me, right? Someone else did it. Third-party culpability defense. They're the only two people in that room. And the fact that there's a sexual assault and likely evidence of that sexual assault makes it very difficult to challenge it based on intent. And that's what the defense is doing here, right? Saying, listen, this may have happened, but he didn't intend to kill her. Well, there's strangulation, asphyxiation. I mean, it's going to be tough, very tough. And then, the other things we talk about, self-defense and that type of thing, manslaughter, heat of passion. I mean, obviously, his lawyers are going to defend him some way. This strikes me as somewhat of a Hail Mary type defense. Maybe really the only defense that they have, because it just doesn't fit into the other boxes. Maybe you might see some sort of deal and mitigation if he really does have mental health issues, but you're certainly not going to get a walk in a case like this. Really, the only question is he going to, get parole at some point in his life, or in the federal system, probation, right? Is that something, supervised release, something to that effect down the road? I don't know, because it's going to be very difficult given the fact that you not only have the murder, but you have the sexual assault as well.
And, this is, I think of the decision today that was made by this judge, and I think of probably the comment section on this video of people who say, why don't you just throw him in the Miami-Dade County jail? Why do we care so much? That's what people will say based off what he's accused of. If a judge was to make that decision and something happens to Timothy Hudson, how could any sort of mistake being made in this part impact maybe the appeals process down the road?
Yeah, I mean, the judge really can't make the decision. I talked about it when it was BOP placement. Judges can say all sorts of things, but there has to be some agreement between, the marshals and that particular facility. There has to be a contract, right? We see it all the time, where ICE, for instance, will run out of space and they'll contract with local or private jails to hold individuals while they're in removal proceedings. But it's not like the feds can just go into, county jails and take over. That would potentially be commandeering. There's a separation of powers issue. So it's not really something that the judge can order. The judge can just make the determination based on what's presented to him or her. But as far as telling the executive branch, and especially telling the county where to house inmates, that would be inappropriate and really something that would exceed his authority.
Nima Rahmani, former federal prosecutor, president of West Coast Trial Lawyers. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Very tough case, but we appreciate your expertise on it.
Thanks, Chris. Talk to us.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and we're also now streaming on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.